Well, I suppose I should apologize for taking so long to get to this next episode. You see, I have a sort of split personality thing going on, kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. The so-called cultured and artistic Jekyll side of me recently went on a sabbatical, and the rough and tumble wild man, Mr. Hyde, took over. Whenever that happens, I shut down my Chromebook, put away my drawing pens, and start building stuff. I get out my timber framing tools and start building barns. Sometimes it can be months before Jekyll gets back to rein in the crazy stuff. He does this quite often, and old man Mr. Hyde wastes no time stepping in to take over. In the past 2 months, I built a granary, a chicken coop, and a 30-foot silo. In the past year, I also built a tractor shed, a tool shed, a Dutch barn, and a heifer barn. My post and beam yet-to-do list includes a dairy barn and a covered bridge. Thanks to my Mr. Hyde side, it's a wonder I get any writing done at all. Did I mention all these buildings are 1/16th scale? Yeah, it's the same scale as my collection of toy farm machinery. Every building is built exactly the same as the real barns I built over the years back up home. Every detail is the same, right down to every mortise and tenon joint, every board, and every shingle. Well, except for the silo. Never built a real silo, but I climbed enough of them. Only difference is, they can, so far, all fit on the dining room table. Don't know where I'm going to put the dairy barn and the covered bridge. Come to think of it, this Jekyll and Hyde thing has been going on most of my life. From as far back as I can remember, and that's one hell of a lot of remembering, one day I'd be on the straight and narrow doing the supposedly right thing, and then the next day I'd be off on some wild diabolical adventure to who knows where. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a sneaky suspicion there's a little Jekyll and Hyde in all of us. I believe Robert Louis Stevenson felt that way when he wrote the story back in 1886. Yeah, you can be expecting in future episodes tales of some of these adventures, if I can clean them up enough to where the guy who edits this stuff will allow it. In the meantime, I'll tell you now of a couple of incidents where Jekyll and Hyde sort of came into play with my life. No wild adventures were involved, but profound decisions were made, and Providence grabbed me by the collar and got my attention in the parking lot of the Thruway Market Shopping Center in Walden, New York. Back in the 60s, if you asked any teenager what they wanted to be when and if they grew up, mostly you'd hear answers such as doctor, lawyer, pilot, soldier, rock star, the usual stuff. You may be shocked to know that Dr. Jekyll had me primed to be, don't laugh, a minister. Yep, a man of the cloth. How that came about is a long story for another time. However, that all changed one Sunday morning with a handshake. No, not with the devil, but rather with a minister. I went to church that morning at the Brick Church in Montgomery. After the service, the minister was at the door, greeting everyone as they left. As I was going out, I shook hands with him. His hand, I noticed, was softer than my mother's. That bothered me. Now, don't get me wrong, I had nothing against this man. He was a good guy. I liked him. I had nothing wrong with his calling in life either. And I knew other ministers and priests and rabbis who were just as rough and tumble as anyone. But Mr. Hyde, wild as he was, still wasn't really evil. He made me think this minister thing over. One's passion in life is born in the heart, then matures in the brain, and then goes out into the world in whatever way one best loves to express that passion. From birth, my way was through what I created with my hands. I chose a different path that day and never looked back. Dr. Jekyll did not object. In spite of turning away from the ministry and heading down the road to metal machines and wooden barns, I kept my faith, my own version of it, and still led a spiritual life, my own version of that. Most likely, by the standards of a holy man, I'd be considered a heathen. Then again, by the standards of a heathen, I'd be considered a saint. Oh well, I had to walk through my life in my shoes. Wouldn't you know, some 20 years later, that life-changing choice, my beliefs, my ideas of faith, were all tested by fate, by providence, by God, if you will. And of all places, in the middle of the Thruway Market Shopping Center parking lot in Walden, New York. I was on my day off from fixing other people's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing problems and busy working on my own. I don't remember exactly what it was I needed, but I had an urgent need to get down to the Thruway Market's hardware department to get whatever it was to complete my repair job. I pulled into a parking space, got out of my van, and noticed the car next to me had its hood up. A young couple stood there staring into the engine compartment, scratching their heads. I suspected a dead battery was their problem, and as usual, I carried jumper cables with me. But Mr. Hyde was riding shotgun with me that day. He was in a hurry. I was on a mission to fix my own problems. I went in, got what I needed, and hurried home, leaving that young couple still scratching their heads and going nowhere. I felt bad about doing that, and the more I thought about it, the worse I felt. It put a dark cloud over what I was doing at home for the rest of the morning. After lunch, I was still mired in whatever repair problem I was dealing with. Worse yet, it turned out I needed something else from the Thruway Market, so back I went. I pulled into the parking lot, and believe it or not, I ended up in the exact same parking spot I parked in earlier. And you probably won't believe this, but as I live and breathe, it's true. In that same parking spot where the unstarting car sat earlier was a different car with the hood up and a different young couple staring at the engine compartment, scratching their heads. And between them stood Dr. Jekyll, glaring at me with a most unpleasant scowl and pointing to a dead battery. Well, as you might expect, or at least guess, this time I immediately went into the back of my van, grabbed my jumper cables, and started their car. They thanked me and offered to pay me, but instead I thanked them and told them I should be the one paying for this second chance at redemption. They looked at me funny, but I was too embarrassed to explain. Dr. Jekyll gave me a great big attaboy, and Mr. Hyde, well, it was his turn to take a long, long sabbatical.